Russia has a serious problem. As the war in Ukraine has progressed, an increasingly large percentage of Russian troops are disobeying orders or fleeing from battle entirely. And in response, Moscow has had to resort to increasingly desperate tactics to keep their soldiers obedient. This is a demonstration of the Russian front line in eastern Ukraine. These are the frontline soldiers, attacking Ukrainian defenses and receiving regular fire from Ukrainian infantry, artillery, and drone attacks. And this is a Russian enforcer line a few kilometers back. The troops in either position have very simple orders. Those on the front line are to fire on Ukrainian positions and attempt to break through in key areas. But those on the enforcer line are a bit different. They are what is known as barrier troops, and their primary job is to fire, not on Ukrainians, but on any Russian soldier who decides to turn around and flee the battle. Increasingly, barrier troops like this are the only way left for Russia to ensure that frontline soldiers will actually obey their commands and fight Ukrainians, by threatening Russian troops with certain death if they feel the temptation to flee the high probability of death on the battlefield. Recent reports have come out stating that entire Russian units have been threatened with execution if any of them flee from Ukrainian artillery fire. And stories have come out revealing that soldiers have been nullified even while they are still in their bases, after expressing their fears about going out to the field, as an example to the other soldiers of what could happen to them should they disobey their orders. While it might sound like the kind of stuff that comes straight out of fiction novels, or over-exaggerated World War II history movies, readily available video evidence of barrier troops in action, alongside numerous interviews with Russian soldiers confessing to their fear of barrier troops, seems to confirm their existence, and their growing use among Russian combat units. And while this is an extremely desperate and sad state of affairs for Russia's military, it is also an interesting window into the current state of Russia as a modern world power, revealing a lot, not just about Moscow's true attitude towards their own troops, but also about the true attitude of many Russian troops towards Moscow, exposing fractures that could lead to an inability for Russia to continue as a global leader in the decades to come. To understand why, you just have to ask one important question. Why is Russia having to resort to such barbaric tactics to keep its soldiers in line in the first place? Why does the threat of death at the hands of their own officers seem to be the only remaining tool in the toolbox when it comes to inspiring Russian soldiers with the will to fight? And why are other Russian efforts at combat compliance proving to be ineffective? Let's start by stating the obvious. Convincing someone to become an active participant in a battle is not an easy task. Human nature will always tend towards self-preservation, and it is not a natural instinct to put yourself in a situation where there is a high probability of your own injury or death. Militaries have known this for millennia, and have come up with a number of different tactics to help soldiers overcome this natural instinct and fight anyways. And while it might be popular to showcase in movies, threatening to kill your own soldiers if they don't comply has not usually been the preferred tactic, because well-trained soldiers are hard to come by, and are not generally to be wasted, and because such tactics, while effective in creating short-term battle results, are ineffective when it comes to building a lasting and prosperous society that is likely the goal of the battle in the first place. Threats of execution are instead usually reserved for acts of extreme desperation, when every other effort has failed, and when a failure to win the battle will result in the collapse of the society anyways. A chilling omen for Russia's future when one considers their current use of the tactic. But if Russia were functioning well, they would have a suite of other tactics to choose from. Throughout history, combat compliance has usually been the result of emotions that have been built into soldiers long before they ever show up on the battlefield. Emotions like patriotism, outrage, or the desire to be seen as heroic. Soldiers might also fight out of a desire for monetary gain or prestige, the desire to protect their country or family from a legitimate threat, or, more often, a desire to simply not fail their comrades and their friends in battle, and be seen as a coward. But whatever the specific emotion might be, these, or other things I haven't mentioned, they all have one thing in common. They make soldiers feel that they have a greater purpose and a reason to fight, and that fighting will lead to a better life in the future. If not for the soldier themselves, then certainly at least for the people they love. And without these key emotions that build up a natural will to fight, the only way to convince a soldier to fight a battle is by convincing them that their chances of survival are higher on the battlefield than they are at the hands of their country's own summary execution squad. For this reason, militaries all over the world have invested long and hard in producing and supporting these emotions, knowing that if they can make the act of going into battle seem more favorable than not, they can have a practically endless cadre of willing soldiers to execute their battlefield plans. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the most effective generals in history, until, of course, he wasn't, had a very famous quote along these lines, saying that a soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. And while it seems a sad quote on the surface, it is probably one of the most impactful things that has ever been said about human psychology. Napoleon knew that the soldiers weren't fighting merely for the ribbon, which was cheap and a lot easier to produce than going into battle was. Instead, the soldiers were fighting long and hard, not for the ribbon, but for what the ribbon represented: honor, respect, sacrifice, skill, endurance, and many other things, which are all held in high esteem, especially at a time when your nation is facing, or is made to feel like they are facing, an existential crisis. To convince men to fight his battles for him, all Napoleon had to do was create the societal conditions under which young men would want to be seen for having these key traits, and then provide the ribbon that could certify that they did. And in almost every society in human history, this sort of thing has been realistically achievable, with the notable exception of, apparently, modern Russia. Sometimes the emotions I've mentioned can arise out of legitimate circumstances, especially when your country has been physically attacked, and the threat is very real and very obvious, as was the case with America in World War II, when Japan made the foolish choice to bomb them and awaken the sleeping giants among their population. But other times, when no actual attack preceded the battle the soldiers are fighting in, as in the case of Russian troops conducting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the emotions can be the result of intentional manipulation by skilled military psychologists and propagandists. If done correctly, this can work just as well as a real attack in giving men a reason to go to battle. But if neither the reality of the threat or the attempts at propaganda are successful in creating the will to fight, something very severe is broken in the society attempting to conduct the battle. History tells us that even if they manage to weather the current conflict, they will usually not survive the next one unless something very significant changes at a societal level. The fact that Russian troops were fleeing from battle at such an alarming rate that Russia had to progress to the ultimate step of combat compliance desperation, putting barrier troops in place and threatening to execute their own men, shows that something much deeper is broken inside of Russia than just their decaying gear or their floundering military-industrial complex. If a soldier will not fight for patriotism, it shows they do not really believe their country is great after all, or that their country's cause is just. If a soldier will not fight for the people at home, it shows either that they do not have people at home to fight for, or simply that they do not actually believe those people are in any real threat of danger. If a soldier will not fight for rewards that showcase their honor and courage, it shows that their own conscience does not believe these things are legitimate in their current fight. If a soldier will not fight even for money, it shows that they don't believe their country can actually make good on its promises, or that the reward is not worth the risk because of the disproportionate danger of the particular battlefield they find themselves on. And if a soldier will not even fight for the men beside them, usually the actual driving force in any real battle, it shows that they may have been raised in a society where people consistently value their own good over the good of others, and that they will not fight for their brothers because they have not been raised to believe that their brothers will return the favor. Or, at the very least, it shows that the soldier has not had sufficient training to help them see themselves as part of a unit rather than as an individual. For a soldier to flee battle, they must fail all of these tests and more, because even one is usually enough to keep them on the line. For enough soldiers to flee battle that their country must intervene with the threat of execution to prevent the problem, well, I've already made my point. One final aspect to this is the makeup of the army itself. If an army is largely made up of volunteers, the proper emotions and the will to fight will usually be in place by default, because they precede even the enlistment. But if an army is significantly made up of conscripts drafted against their will, convincing those conscripts to fight will be much harder. And the modern Russian military is largely made up of either mercenaries who are fighting only for the money, or conscripts who have been drafted against their will. A huge percentage of these mercenaries are coming from prisons, where people are only fighting for a chance to end their prison sentences faster. And a disproportionate percentage of these conscripts are coming from Russia's poorest regions, like Siberia and the Caucasus, some of which have recently been involved in separatist dialogues and protests against Moscow. Part of the reason these soldiers aren't willing to fight, except for in the face of the fear of certain death if they don't, is because many of them see Moscow as their main enemy, not Ukraine. And this is another crack in Russia that goes a step deeper than even the biggest failures at combat compliance. I've already created another video covering this subject in detail, so be sure to watch my episode on why many Siberians want to secede from Russia if you're interested in learning more. Thanks for watching, and thanks to my supporters on Patreon who help to make the channel possible. Head over to Patreon now if you want to learn more about the special benefits available to supporters of the channel. I'll see you on the next one.